Most people think difficult conversations are difficult because they're afraid of conflict. I don't think that's the real reason. I think difficult conversations are difficult because we often don't know what's really going on. And as PMs and leaders, we are expected to have answers. But some conversations don't come with answers, they come with uncertainty. Let me explain. Over the years, I've had some genuinely difficult conversations. Not just stakeholder disagreements, not just project conflicts. I mean conversations where someone's well being, career, or future was potentially involved. In one situation, several colleagues had approached me with concerns about a team member, their behavior had changed, and their work was being affected. People suspected there might be alcohol or substance related issues involved. In another organization, years later, I found myself in a very similar situation with a different employee. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, I want to be clear. I don't know what was happening. I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't qualified to diagnose anything. What I did know was that there were observable changes in behavior and performance that needed to be discussed. So I had the conversation, and here's what happened. The individual denied there was a problem completely. Now what? This is where many leadership books stop, because the reality is that sometimes you don't get resolution. Sometimes the person doesn't acknowledge what you're saying. Sometimes they don't agree with your assessments. Sometimes they don't even accept the premise of the conversation. And that's when I've learned one of the most important lessons about difficult conversations. The goal is not necessarily agreement, the goal is understanding and, where possible, progress. Not victory, not validation, not proving you're right. Progress. Because once I stopped trying to convince people and started focusing on understanding their perspective, the conversation became more productive. Not easier, but more productive. And that brings me to a sentence that I've found incredibly useful over the years. Whenever I'm entering a difficult conversation, I try to start with, I'd like to discuss something that I think is creating challenges for both of us, and I'd love to get your perspective. I like this opening because it immediately changes the dynamic. It doesn't accuse, it doesn't diagnose, it doesn't assume intent, and it creates room for dialogue. Now, let me tell you about another situation that taught me an even deeper lesson. I once had a team member who was relatively new in their role. Initially, things seemed to be going reasonably well. Then performance started to decline. As a manager, I did what most managers would do. I provided feedback, I highlighted areas for improvement, I tried to support them, but something changed. Their confidence appeared to collapse. Every conversation became harder. And then something happened that I'd never experienced before. Whenever I sat down to discuss performance or development, they started crying every single time. As you can imagine, those conversations became incredibly difficult. Not because I was angry, not because they were defensive, but because neither of us seemed to be able to move the conversation forward. I brought HR into the process, hoping they could help. Unfortunately, that didn't really solve the problem. HR wanted to move quickly into formal processes and action plans, but I felt we still didn't understand what was actually happening. We were trying to treat symptoms before understanding causes. Eventually, it became clear that there were significant personal challenges happening outside of work, challenges I hadn't been aware of, challenges that were affecting confidence, focus, and performance. And that experience taught me something I still carry with me today. Behavior is often the visible part of a much larger story. What you see at work is not always the problem, it's often the symptom. The missed deadline, the resistance, the poor performance, the emotional reactions, those are often signals. The real issue might be hidden underneath. That's why curiosity is one of the most underrated leadership skills. Many managers enter difficult conversations trying to prove something. I think the better approach is to discover something, to ask, what am I missing? What might I not understand? What is this person's experience that I'm not seeing? Now, let me be clear, curiosity doesn't mean avoiding accountability. That is important. As leaders, we still have responsibilities. Projects still need to be delivered, performance expectations still matter. Teams still need support. There are situations where formal processes become necessary. There are situations where difficult decisions have to be made. But accountability works far better when it follows understanding, not when it replaces it. And this is where many difficult conversations go wrong. People enter what I call prosecutor mode. They gather evidence, build a case, prepare arguments, and then walk into the conversation determined to prove they're right. The other person immediately feels attacked, defensiveness rises, learning stops, progress stalls. Instead, try entering investigator mode, not to catch someone out, but to understand what is really happening. Because difficult conversations are rarely about delivering information. Most people already know there's a problem. They're about uncovering reality. And reality is often messier than we expect. So if there's one idea I'd leave with you, it's this. When you're preparing for a difficult conversation, stop asking, how do I get this person to agree with me? Start asking, what might I not understand yet? That single mindset shift has helped me navigate stakeholder conflicts, performance issues, emotionally charged discussions, and some of the most uncomfortable conversations of my career. And if you need a place to start, try this. I'd like to discuss something that I think is creating challenges for both of us, and I'd love to get your perspective. Because credibility isn't built by avoiding difficult conversations, it's built by showing up to them with courage, curiosity, and respect. And sometimes the most important thing you can bring to a difficult conversation isn't an answer, it's a genuine desire to understand.